Are there certain automation technology types that you think, I know you've mentioned robots and cobots, of course, but those or others that you think will be of highest interest to manufacturers this year?
Yeah, I think if you look at who's spending on robots who's spending on automation right now and who isn't, the automotive industry is spending less and less every year on robotics and installed automation systems. And that you could see that as, oh, they're pulling back on things. It's really a more complex story than that. That's the largest user of automation systems by a huge margin. But one, they've made these investments over a very long period of time, and they have highly automated facilities. So there's not a lot of room to grow. So there's not a lot. Yeah, the automotive market's more of a replacement market now for a lot of the
Mhm.
automation technologies. But then there's also the continued trend that's been going on for many, many years now to outsource as much as possible to the supply chain. And so we're seeing that actually been a very strong increase in installations of robotics, specifically at metal and machinery industry operations. So the people who are making parts for the automakers are buying a lot of the robots that maybe the Fords and GMs and Toyotas of the world would have been buying a few years ago. So it's just moving down the chain. And one of the reasons of that is just the lower cost. Cobots are a big part of the lower cost, but not the entirety of it. I mean, you can get a six-axis FANUC or an ABB for a tenth the price you would have, a decade ago. So the cost per robot, especially for these large industrial ones, is so much more approachable now to some of these mid-sized manufacturers than it was a while back.
Mhm.
Um, that said, the ones getting the most attention right now are smaller, lighter, again, collaborative.
Mhm.
Going back to the whole workforce issue, finding a skilled robotics engineer, someone who can program the systems and set those things up, that's a lot more challenging than telling someone, okay, actually guide the robot until to do what you want it to do, and then we'll use some simplified programming after the fact. Uh, it's a lot easier to set things up now than it used to be, and you don't necessarily need the highly trained engineer for every project. I mean,
Yeah.
obviously, when you're doing one of these really complex operations with 25 processes and things like that, that's one thing. But if you're, I've seen some applications recently where kind of end of the line, grabbing the things off, palleting them up, and wrapping them. You don't need complex robotic skills and programming skills to do something like that. But that is the sort of thing that allows you to save one more person in the warehouse, and those get very, 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 very tough jobs to fill right now.
Yeah, I like that you mentioned those kind of spot solutions, if you will, for robotics, and that I've been seeing much more of that in the past several years for that instead of this large, complex integration, which obviously happens, where people are redoing lines are obviously in greenfield plant situations, but I have been seeing a lot of that for like these isolated spot cases of it, which are much simpler to implement. Absolutely. So on the flip side of that, are you hearing anything from manufacturing businesses that make you think certain kinds of automation tech investments, whether it's software or hardware, might be put on the back burner this year compared to where interest has been over the past few years?
Yeah, I'm actually fairly optimistic for 2025, just because the past 18 months or so have major industry has been in this weird limbo spot. It's just the worst possible scenario for big investments in technology, which was orders were coming in at a fine pace. They weren't exciting. It was not the sense of, oh my God, things are awful. We need to lay off half of our workers and cut costs to survive. But also it wasn't, oh wow, we can't hit demand, so we need to invest dramatically to meet these orders. Things were coming in fine, and fine is just not a good place to be if you're trying
Mhm.
to justify big capital expenses. And that really defined almost all of 2024 and the latter half of 2023. Inflation, went up. People were kind of panicking a bit, but the consumer spending stayed strong. So you had just this very weird leveling effect where there was lots and lots of concern, but no real long-term damage being done to a lot of these industries. So you just saw people kind of waiting it out and waiting it out and waiting it out.
Mhm.
We have a lot of factors going into 2025 now that imply that this is going to be a better year. One, housing starts have really taken off, and housing starts ripple through the economy into every manufacturing trend. Because okay, a new house needs a new dishwasher, a new refrigerator, all
Mhm.
these. New housing construction means you need more pickups. So you have to have people, the contractors driving to the site to install all the equipment and things like that. So the more houses you build, the more economic activity that really floods the manufacturing sector between automotive appliances, electrical distribution systems, all these things. And we're seeing some really positive signs on housing starts and a lot of the policy discussions happening. Yeah, this was Biden or Trump where we're going to do this. We know there's a housing crisis in America where we have too few houses for too many people. So that this was going to have to happen. And so that alone seems like it's going to really drive, especially toward the latter half of the year, a lot of production in a lot of industries, which will mandate investments in automation to meet that rising tide. So I don't see any one technology that's kind of passe at this point. I mean, I do see more of it going into the easier to install, faster ROI, smaller robots, just because that's what people are going to want. They're going to want something they can quickly see that return on. The bigger projects, the green fields, so we're going to pull out the entire line and start over from scratch and come out with the best possible highly orchestrated facility. I don't see that as popular these days. That was always a big automotive thing, and that really is back in the days where you could sell a 500,000 Toyota Camrys a year. Now that the
Mhm.
market is so stratified and everyone wants a slightly different vehicle, you don't see one product dominating the markets enough that you can justify these like single purpose robots that do just one thing, or
Mhm.
single purpose automation assemblies that just do one or two things. Everything has to be more flexible, everything has to be a little bit slower, and that kind of points to things like highly programmable robots, so slower, more capable, not necessarily that feed top line production, fast, 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 like we
Mhm.
saw a few years ago.